Chapter 9, The Global Shift, How this ism fundamentally changed world history, politics. If we follow the life of the mind through corridors carved by a single idea, Plato's mind leaves a wider footprint than most. The isms that travel with a thinker often arrive as afterimages, subtle, persistent, and capable of rearranging entire civilizations when they intersect with culture, power, and need. The ism most closely associated with the figure we have been tracing, Plato, does not announce itself with banners or slogans. It announces itself, instead, as a font of arguments about reality, virtue, and order, and then quietly insinuates itself into the architecture of political life. The global shift I want to illuminate in this chapter is not about a single policy or a single revolution. It is about a way of thinking, the Platonic insistence that political life should be ordered by reasoned, rational ends that aim at the good, the true, and the unified order of the city and the soul. And it is about how that way of thinking, through a web of translations, schools, and reforms, altered the political field across continents and centuries. Plato's ism in a sentence, a belief that the polis, city-state, is not merely a coalition of interests and appetites but an organized instrument through which human beings strive toward the good, a form of reality more real than the shifting appearances of daily life. The philosopher, in his vision, is the one who can discern this good and guide the city toward it. The political question, then, becomes a question of education, of enlightenment, and of the reordering of society so that truth, and not merely force or tradition, governs public life. That claim, uncompromising, morally charged, and at times provocative, would travel far beyond the walls of Athens and the pages of a dialogue. 1. The Republic as a political blueprint and its global resonances. In the Republic, Plato gives us not a map of a single city but a template for thinking about political authority. The city, in his telling, should be stratified into three classes: rulers, the guardians, trained to see the form of the good, auxiliaries, warriors who defend the city and enforce its law, and producers, farmers, artisans, merchants who sustain the material life of the polity. The logic is not crude hierarchy but a rational division grounded in the soul's orientation toward the good. The ascent from appetite to spirit to reason mirrors the ascent from political utility to moral justification. If the political aims of a city are to be more than crude power or mere tradition, they must be anchored in an education that shapes citizens, young guardians trained in mathematics, dialectic, music, and philosophy, so that governance can be justified not by force, fear, or hereditary authority, but by knowledge of what is truly good. The global significance of this blueprint arises from its translatability. It is not a recipe for a particular kind of regime. It is a method for evaluating regimes. Do they cultivate virtue? Do they sustain the common good, not merely private interest? Do they protect the horizon of justice beyond faction? Across cultures and eras, these questions became fuel for reform. In medieval Europe, the Christian appropriation of Platonic logic, mixed with Christian anthropology and the reality of divine order, did not erase the Republic's questions but refracted them through a Christian lens: the city of God versus the earthly city, the ends of the soul, and the legitimacy of rulers under a higher law. In other words, Plato's political anthropology offered a language with which communities could discuss legitimacy, purpose, and education in a way that could be harmonized with local religious and cultural commitments. 2. Education as political technology, from academies to empires. A striking feature of Platonic thought is that politics is inseparable from education. If rulers must discern the good, then training, the shaping of desires, appetites, and rational capacities, becomes a political technology. The claim that education is not a private good but a public obligation follows directly from the Republic's architecture. A polity that neglects philosophy, mathematics, dialectic, and music is a polity that will drift into tyranny by habit, inertia, or fear. Education is the instrument by which the city tunes the souls of its citizens to live in harmony with a rational order. The global diffusion of this idea would prove transformational. In Europe, the medieval period saw the rise of schools and universities that could be read as Platonic derivatives, places where minds were trained to think critically about law, governance, and the good life. The universities, great halls of disputation, law, theology, and philosophy, emerged as the laboratories in which the political imagination could be tested against the demands of a rational order. The Platonic emphasis on the unity of virtue and knowledge underwrites the idea that governance is not merely a contest of interests but a discipline of the rational life. That understanding seeded later political theories that would dignify public education, professional merit, and the rule of law as essential to civic life. Beyond Europe, the very idea that education should cultivate virtue and discernment touched other civilizations that navigated, or negotiated, the modern state. In the Islamic world, the intellectual culture of the House of Wisdom and the great centers of learning synthesized Greek philosophy with Islamic thought. While Aristotelian logic and ethics became pronounced pillars of political theory there, Platonic intuitions, especially about the unity of truth, the ascent from opinion to knowledge, and the governance of the city by those who understand universal order, found receptivity among scholars who were passionate about cosmic order and the moral shape of political life. The result was not a direct copy of Plato's Republic but a global reverberation, the claim that a city's health depends on the education of its leaders and its citizens, and that the most competent minds should guide the body politic toward a shared, noble aim. Even in places far from Athens or Baghdad, the Platonic current provided a mental habit, the conviction that politics is coachable, improvable, and improvable toward the good through the deliberate cultivation of reason. The modern world's universities, bureaucracies, and public schools, institutions that train citizens for public life, owe a debt to this Platonic inheritance. That debt is not merely a matter of curriculum, it is a claim about the purpose of public life itself, education as the means by which collective life becomes rational, coherent, and just. 3. The universalism of the good and the problem of plural worlds. One of the most profound global shifts linked to Platonic thought is the emergence of a universalist ambition, that the good, the true, and the just are not merely local goods of a single polis but intelligible across different peoples and cultures. Plato's insistence that there exists a form of the good that shines through particular instances gives political life a horizon beyond faction, tribe, or city. In a world of expanding contact, trade routes stretching across the Mediterranean, Islamic empires linking East and West, and later global interconnectedness, this universalist impulse translated into political language, is there a form of justice, order, or virtue that can be claimed, argued for, and defended beyond one city's borders? The global consequences were both liberating and perilous. On the one hand, universalist language provided a scaffolding for early modern universal rights claims, critiques of despotism, and the embrace of cosmopolitan legal and philosophical frameworks. The idea that rulers ought to govern not only for their city but in a way that reflects the rational order common to humanity contributed to the slow emergence of ideas about natural law and the dignity of persons. It would guide the centuries-long conversation about the person, the state, and the rights or duties attached to citizenship. On the other hand, universalism risks becoming a pretext for cultural imperialism or for imposing a privileged form of order on diverse contexts. The noble question remains how to honor the universal aspiration without reducing local difference to a mere stage on the way to a single, standardized political life. In that sense, Platonic political thought, when translated globally, becomes a site of contest. What is the form of the good in a plural world? How can education and governance be aligned with universal truths while respecting cultural particularity and religious commitments? This tension, between universal aspiration and local particularity, has been a constant in the global reception of Platonic politics. It is a tension that modern democracy has learned to inhabit. The dream of a polity guided by rational, virtuous leadership sits beside the reality of pluralism, compromise, and contested authority. The Platonic question pushes us to examine whether our political systems can aim at common goods that all peoples can recognize while remaining faithful to their inherited forms of life. 4. The Philosopher King and the evolution of political authority. The figure at the center of Plato's political anthropology is the Philosopher King, a ruler who knows the good because she or he has ascended beyond the realm of opinion into the realm of knowledge. The theoretical appeal of such a ruler is clear. Rulers should be judged by their grasp of truth and their ability to govern in light of that truth. In practice, the image did not become a universal political program. Yet its influence reverberated through centuries of political thought as a symbol for ideal leadership, the legitimate authority of the educated, and the argument that political power must be justified through rational deliberation rather than inherited privilege alone. Globally, this idea traveled in several currents. In Europe, it fed the dream of enlightened despotism and, later, the liberal ideal that legitimate authority arises from consent, reason, and institutional checks. Even when actual rulers did not claim to be philosophers, the temptation to cloak governance in rationalist legitimacy, administrative reform, codified law, improved education, owes something to the Platonic imagination. In Christian Europe, the philosopher king could be reimagined as a steward under the sovereignty of God, a mediator who could harmonize divine law with human reason. This reframing helped integrate Platonic rationalism with Christian moral anthropology and contributed to a political theology in which rulers are judged by their fidelity to justice, mercy, and the common good. In the Islamic world, while the direct figure of a philosopher king did not dominate political imagination, the Platonic emphasis on rational governance and the unity of truth inspired debates among rulers and scholars about governance, wisdom, and the moral duties of authority. The integration of philosophy with statecraft in various Islamic polities often took a Neoplatonic turn, balancing rational insight with theological commitments. The risk embedded in this ideal, an untrammeled appeal to rational authority, has haunted modern political theory as well. The noble attempt to secure good government through knowledge can slide into an insistence on elite rule, technocracy, or the suppression of dissent in the name of the rational good. The Platonic caution is necessary here. The cure for political error is not the replacement of politics by a ruler's intellect but a disciplined pedagogy in which wisdom is tested by law, accountability, communal deliberation, and open contestation. The global shift Plato initiated, then, involves not only the prestige of knowledge but the enduring political problem of how to translate knowledge into just, inclusive, enduring governance. 5. The global diffusion. How the Platonic imagination shaped institutions. The long arc of Platonic influence on world politics can be read in institutions and practices as much as in theories. Think of the university as a modern surrogate for the academy, where inquiry is governed by reasoned argument and where the training of citizens and rulers proceeds under a shared commitment to truth. Think of political philosophy as a discipline that insists political authority must be justified by public arguments about the good life rather than by force or custom alone. Think of law as a rational order designed to curb passion and to protect the vulnerable, grounded in the belief that there is a rational structure to human affairs that law can discover and articulate. In different corners of the globe, these ideas found institutional expression in ways that altered political life. In medieval and early modern Europe, the legal frameworks for sovereignty and the rule of law, often in tension with monarchical or clerical prerogatives, began to assume their modern form under the influence of a rationalist temper that Plato helped to foment. The idea that governors are responsible to reason public discourse, enshrined in debates, councils, and courts, helped to create political cultures in which legitimacy rests on argument, evidence, and institutional restraint. Meanwhile, in other civilizations, the Platonic emphasis on education, virtue, and rational governance contributed to the moral and administrative vocabulary that rulers used to justify and organize power, sometimes aligning with religious authority, sometimes challenging it. The global shift is not a single teleology. It is a pattern of intensifying reflection on the ends of politics, a growing belief that political life can and should be an intelligible, improvable enterprise. That belief is the seedbed of human rights discourse, constitutionalism, merit-based public service, and the separation of powers, concepts that did not originate with Plato but that grew in the soil his ideas helped to cultivate. The ism of Platonism, in this global sense, is a political technology. It teaches that the heart of politics is not merely who wins, but what kind of rational, virtuous order we can justify and sustain. 6. The moral shadow and the potential for misuse. No account of Platonic political influence would be honest without acknowledging the moral shadow cast by the Republic's architecture. The insistence that statecraft should be guided by knowledge of the good, an order accessible to a rare elite, offers a powerful justification for hierarchical authority and the suppression of dissent when read simplistically. The noble lie, the excision of lower pleasures, and the elevation of the guardian king raise perennial questions about legitimacy, consent, and freedom. If the good is defined by an elite who can discern it, who protects the people from the inevitable temptations of power, and who keeps the state anchored to truth, what happens when that elite becomes the law even against the will of the people? The global political history of the Platonic tradition includes episodes in which rational governance was invoked to rationalize coercion, censorship, or autocracy. This is the other side of the Platonic coin. What prevents this from becoming a doctrinal trap is the enduring, global lesson that the moral and political life must be subject to critique, discussion, and reform. The Platonic project, education as a means to the common good, the insistence that politics must be rationally justified, survives most healthily when it remains open to scrutiny, dissent, and plural voices. The global shift thus includes not merely a transfer of ideas but a continuous negotiation. How far can reason and virtue guide political life without undermining pluralism, liberty, and legitimacy? The answer many thinkers provide is that philosophy should guard the state against fear and passion, while remaining deeply attentive to the people's rights and voices. The balance between wisdom and liberty becomes a cross-cultural challenge that continues to shape politics today. 7. The late modern echoes, from humanism to constitutionalism and beyond. The long shadow of Plato's ism culminates, in the West, in a movement from the Renaissance humanist admiration of classical wisdom to the constitutional frameworks of modern democracies. The Florentine revival of Plato, led by scholars who translated and interpreted his works for a new audience, helped to seed a new confidence in human capability, the idea that human beings, through learning and virtue, can participate in shaping public life. This is a crucial link in the chain from ancient politics to modern institutions, a belief that leaders are accountable not merely to a ruler's whim but to a rational, shared standard of justice, and that education is a public good essential to this standard. In the wider world, Platonic influence contributed to a cosmopolitan language in political thought. It encouraged claims about the universality of reason that, even when contested, provided common ground for cross-cultural dialogue about law, governance, and the aims of public life. The modern international order, its idea of universal rights, its critique of absolute sovereignty in favor of humanitarian norms, its aspiration toward peaceful cooperation, owes something to the Platonic insistence that there exists a rational order accessible to all rational beings. Again, this is not to erase the particularities of different political communities or to claim that Platonic theory directly prescribes modern arrangements. It is to insist that the aspirational geometry of politics, how a society ought to be ordered, was reshaped by a philosophy that insisted on the primacy of reason, education, and unity under the good. Conclusion: the global shift as a continuous conversation. What, then, is the global shift we witness when we trace Plato's ism around the world? It is not a simple cause and effect storyline. It is a long, looping conversation in which a single set of questions: what should political life aim at? How can a city be educated to seek the good? What kind of leader can responsibly govern in light of universal truth, reaches across cultures, crosses centuries, and is refracted through religious, legal, and educational systems? The result is a world in which politics becomes an arena where reason, debate, moral aspiration, and institutional form constantly reconfigure one another. The Republic's shadow falls over the modern state, sometimes as a source of legitimacy, often as a cautionary tale about power, and always as a reminder that political life is, at its best, a rational and virtuous project rather than a mere contest of power. Plato's ism did not create a world polity in a single stroke. Rather, it seeded a durable pattern, the belief that politics is a discipline that can and should be educated, argued, and refined, that leaders should be chosen for their capacity to discern and apply the good, that law and institutions can and should channel human energy toward shared, just ends. In every culture that encountered his thought, whether through translation, appropriation, or dialogue, these notes of rational aspiration found a place in political practice. The global shift is thus a shift of the imagination as much as a shift of policy. It is the movement from a politics defined by domination and tradition to a politics imagined as a cooperative search for a common good, pursued through education, debate, and the steady reformation of public life. If we pause here to reflect on the arc of Plato's influence, we see that the portrait of the philosopher becomes a portrait of history itself. The philosopher's gaze, searching for the form behind the appearance, insisting that governance must be just and knowable, has persistently challenged, sustained, and sometimes unsettled political life around the world. The ism remains not a closed system but a living invitation to think, argue, reform, and reimagine politics so that human beings may inhabit a city, even if only in imagination, that is more coherent with the truth they seek and the good they aspire to share. That is the global shift Plato modeled, and the world has never stopped listening.